Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how you can make this paper spread animation in Blender using geometry nodes. So first I'm going to delete the default cube, then add in a object, doesn't matter which one, because we are going to be deleting all the vertices. Just so we have an empty object, we can rename this paper. And then in this object I want to add in a geometry nodes modifier. Then I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and in here we are not going to be using this input geometry, so we can remove it in here, and that gives us a clean slate to work with. So the first thing I want to do is add in a plane, which you can do with the grid node. We can preview it by pressing Ctrl Shift and left mouse button, and we can see our plane here. I want this plane to be about 2 meters, and this will be like the paper we're going to be using. We also want this to be pretty subdivided because we're going to be moving the vertices around. So setting this to something like 51 vertices, so we have 50 faces in every direction, will be fine. And this is going to be our paper that we're going to be using. Then what I want to be doing is adding in another grid node, then setting the vertices on the x-axis to 1, just so it's a straight line. And then on the y direction we're going to be choosing how much paper we want. For me, I think 25 will be fine, and then just set the thickness to something like 0.25, just so it's not that big. And we're going to be using this to scatter our other grid onto. So we can just convert this mesh to points with a mesh to points node, and we can see all of our points here. And now we just want to instance our paper on these points. So add in a instance on points node. Set the points to the mesh to points and then the instance to the grid, and that will look like this. And now we just need to add in some rotation just so it looks nice, so 90 degrees on the x-axis, just so it's nice and upright. And I'm also just going to turn on our cavity here, setting this to both just so we can see this a little bit better. Alright, so now we have 25 pieces of paper here standing upright, and I want this to be affected by an empty, which if I move it closer, the paper will spread more. So we're going to add in a empty, and I'm going to choose a cube, and then we're just going to be scaling this down to like 0.2, just so it's a little bit smaller than our paper. If we go back into the paper, we can just preview it again or put it into the output. Then we would just want to instance this cube and make sure that everything that's in a certain range will be affected and moved to one side. So to do that, we need to realize our instances, and then we can also just change the individual vertices instead of just all of them at once. Now we want to add in a set position node, and then for this offset we want to be changing this depending on the distance to the cube right here. So the first thing we can do for that is just drag in this empty. This will add in an object info node. And we want the location of this one, and that will tell us where it is depending on this object. And if we preview that with the geometry of the plane here, you will see that right now it is 0, but if I move this cube a little bit, it becomes a color, which indicates the direction it is moving in. And then we can split this color into different factors and then just get the directions. But as you can see, this is just a flat value. So we need to do something so we can actually get a gradient around this cube. My first thought was to add in a gradient texture, but that doesn't work because the factor will just be one single value. So that means everything is white. So what we have to do is we need to add in a factor math node, set this to subtract, and then subtract the world position, or the position of this plane, of course, with this location of the cube. And then if I set this to quadratic sphere, this will create a nice gradient around our cube. If I just move this a little bit closer, we can see. Alright, and now we want to use this value and then just set the position. So if we try that just without any modifications, you can see this doesn't look very great. And that is because it's moving in the x direction and the z direction, which we don't want. So we're going to be adding in a combine XYZ node before this, and then putting this into the y direction. The reason we want quadratic sphere is because if we set this to spherical instead, it has this really intense cutoff here, which we don't want. So quadratic sphere. Alright, so now we have this, and it's going into one direction, which we don't really want. So we can sample this position, add in a separate XYZ node, and then if we use the Y direction and multiply it with the gradient texture, we can also get the negative values as well. So add in a math node, and then just multiply these values. And as we can see now, it goes in both directions. And then another thing we want to do is just multiply this again by something like 5 for the intensity. And it's going to be it for avoiding our cube. Now we just want to set shade smooth and then set a material if we want to do that later. And now if we move this cube, you will see that our paper is avoiding it. Alright, so one last thing I want to do is I want to introduce some noise to like where the paper is, because right now they're all perfectly aligned, which isn't really realistic. So just here where we instance on the points, I want to change the locations a little bit. So add in another set position node and add this before the mesh points. And then we can just change where our paper is instanced to. And we're going to be driving that with a noise texture. Then with a combine XYZ, I just want to only affect the X and Z direction. And that is looking like this. And you will see it goes into one direction, which is not really what we want because it's not centered anymore. So what we need to do is just subtract the factor value of 0.5, but we also want to be changing the intensity while we're doing that. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So for the intensity, you can just add in a math node in front of this, and then we can multiply, and this will increase the intensity. But of course, this will make it so it's offset even more. So we want to use this value in another multiply node, and then another combine XYZ node, just connect it up to the X and Z again. And now we want to factor subtract this. So add in a factor math node, and then subtract, and this will place it back in the center. But we need to make sure that these values are the same. So I'm just going to drag off this and add in a value node. Set this to 0.5, and this one will be 0.5 as well. And now it's back in the center. And we can change things like the scale and anything we want about the noise texture. Alright, and that is basically it. Now we can just add the cube here, and then just move it closer to our paper, and it will avoid it, which is really nice. So if you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.